Hello again, and welcome back. This is episode 35 of the Pregame Network podcast.
Mm-hmm.
This is Dan and Anthony yet again. The third person to be here is almost never gonna show up again, so you
We
can forget
will
about
the
him.
you don't damn high school. Listen, I'm sure we will see him yet again at a certain point, depending on his schedule, and who knows who else will show up over time. It's not a rotating door, so to speak, but
Mm,
we're at the end of the day, it's the two of us plus whoever wants to show up.
yeah,
We're the my brother likes to say we bring the content. We bring the content. There you go.
I'm just bitter, that's all.
You sound like a jilted lover. You should talk to him. I'm sure he'd. You guys should play some Helldivers together. You guys talk enough about it.
Every time I'm on and I go to play something, I actually check to see if he's on Helldivers because I definitely still want to play like I want to play Helldivers in general because they added so much content and I barely
Mhm.
scratched the surface of what they've added. But like it's obviously so much better with friends,
Yeah,
so that just to be able to play with somebody else who has the game would be nice.
give him a shout.
Um,
He's a talkative sort when he's here.
uh-huh. We're talking about Joe, by the way, for any recurring listener.
Yes. You were treating him like I can't name him. Just the guy who's
This
normally
fucking
here.
guy.
Oh my god.
Um, well, anyway, it's been an
Yes.
eventful week for me. I've
Hmm.
been extremely busy, but I have carved out time for some game time. The list is really not that long. It's really just Path of Exile 2 and Helldivers 2.
Hmm.
Um, I I really kind of got dragged into Path of Exile. I hit a wall with a boss and I finally beat it, and then I got a better skill with my mercenary, and I just kind of went down the rabbit hole with it, and I find like that's definitely my main class. I know I was talking about last week how I can't decide which character I want to play.
Hmm.
Um, but now it's definitely mercenary for anybody who gives a shit. Um,
It's good to settle into something so you can
yeah,
like
which
enjoy it
makes sense
proper for the
because
long
like
haul.
I played Demon Hunter a lot on Diablo 3. Um, so that kind of fits the same mold. Helldivers 2, there is actually something that I want to talk about with Helldivers that we can get into later about a
Yeah, sure.
certain crossover event that they did. You may or may not have heard of it.
I've heard about it.
Um,
Yes.
yeah, but uh, Helldivers is just like even by myself, it's just a great fucking time. It's just so much fun. Um,
Hmm.
and even when you're like just playing the game, it just feels good to play, which is never a negative,
Of
obviously.
course.
And you go on and on about having a third-person shooter that you want to play,
Yes.
and it's just a fucking shame how your computer can't really handle it, and you don't have a
Yeah.
PS5, so you
Yeah.
just like because whenever I'm on, I would drag you with me to play
Yeah.
this game, but you
'Cause
you don't have a
It,
means to play it,
it
which makes me
it's
sad.
you mentioned would scratch that itch, and I remember back when I did actually try it. One of the things I highlighted was it felt in a lot of ways like it took some of its DNA from Metal Gear Solid 5, which I've
Okay.
always said, whether it's for a Metal Gear game or for something else, it had such a good feeling backbone for like
hmm
third person action shooting
Oh,
almost.
yeah, we talked about like the fact that there's a lot of nuance to the game mechanics and to the animations where like
Yeah.
they didn't have to include a lot of the stuff that they did, but the
Yeah.
fact that they included it makes the game feel like a more complete product and a more polished game.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
and
fluffed
you
and
directly
polished in all the right
referenced,
places.
yeah, you directly referenced the fact that they did that with Metal Gear.
Yeah,
Um,
like it's like you look at Metal Gear Solid 5. I'm not gonna go too nuts here, but you look at Metal Gear Solid 5, and it was a first for the series in many ways in how it handled, where it was like a lot more fluid. It was less about walking to a wall, pressing a button to kind of like get in position, and more it's just you would fluidly walk up to certain things, and it would
yeah,
just
there's a
act
lot
out,
of
and you can
nuance
move.
involved, and
Yes.
yeah, the fluidity, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, and
Um,
I was surprised to see a lot of that in Helldivers. I'm glad
yeah.
another game looked at that and said like, this looks and feels good. Let's even though we're not like a stealth game, let's give you the options to move around and then dive and crouch walk and all this kind of stuff. And it was nice to feel. I would probably, if I had the opportunity, I'd be playing it with you. Yes.
My one gripe with Helldivers that it's it has been there since the beginning is the fact that it's everything is uh, everything is in third person, obviously, but they give you the option to ADS in first person. But
Yes.
like the level of animations that they put into it kind of make me feel like at a certain point they toyed around with the option of making the game just a first person shooter.
Mm.
Um, and and then they just decided to say no and just include like the ADS with
Yeah.
um you know I don't know it was a weird decision. There's actually the exact reason why I don't like Ghost Recon because it can't decide what it wants to be because you
Yeah.
walk around in third person but then every single time you get into a gunfight and you want to aim you get snapped into first, and to me like I just feel like pick one.
That's yeah. It can be done, but it's very tricky to do that hybrid where it's like 90% of the game, 80% of the game is third person. It's a third person game, but under certain circumstances, you go into first person for aiming or other
Yeah.
mechanics. It can be done. Very
For what it's
rarely is it
worth,
done well.
agreed. For what it's worth, I think Helldivers does do a good job of it, but it still kind of irks me as type of gamer that I am. That
Mhm.
like the the thought and the polish was put into enough of the first person stuff to make me feel like I would want to just play this in first person.
Yeah,
But that I just prefer first person shooters.
that's
Um,
fair.
yeah. So that's what I've been playing this week. We can get into the whole crossover event a little later on,
Yeah,
but why
yeah.
don't you give me the lowdown of on what you've been playing?
I've been letting myself down. I haven't really
Oh,
been playing too much. I've just been working on too much stuff myself.
yeah.
So this is going into this last week coming up. I'm gonna do the same thing I said I was gonna do last week, where it's I want to sit down. I think I'm gonna try a new game every day and just see where I end up.
Really?
But yeah, but just sometimes maybe even two. It's feasible. I just need to remember to do it in my workday. But it's just for me, it's been Street Fighter, Girls Frontline, Guilty Gear, just the usual stuff I have sitting that's open and easy to play while I'm working on things. Nothing too
Yeah.
extravagant unless I'm forgetting something, which I don't think I am. I'm also playing a decent amount of Marvel Rivals, just because that's like I said,
Really?
that's the yeah, it's the game. It's because back in the day, or did I say back in the day, like a couple years ago, like Overwatch was a game that me, Harrison, Luke, and Nick, we would just sit down and play because it was easy to pick up, it was easy to get into. They don't take it like I know some people take competitive shooters even at a casual level a little too seriously and it leads to burnout. I know we know at least one guy that does that. To the point where he's sworn off PvP games altogether. And just to clarify, because I know the guy we're talking about is never going to watch this, and somebody else might take it the wrong way, we're talking about Eric, our good friend, as featured on the B team, who likes to shout a lot. But the whole point is like me and who I play it with, we win, we lose, we try, but we never get burnt out, and it's just something that it's easy to play. Like how you have you as somebody who lives and breathes games, that's your hobby. Like you'll try a little bit of everything, but you have friends that aren't necessarily that tuned in. They just they'll have a console and they'll have a handful of games, right? Like
Yep.
that's the kind of game this is like it's free to play. People
Yeah.
who don't play games will play it for multiple reasons, and it's just do stuff with people you like that you can't get them to play anything else, and that's why I've been playing a lot of it. But
I did try it, and
yeah.
like I don't. To be fair, I don't think I gave it like a fair shake,
Mm-hmm.
but I did probably play it for about an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just not really my type of game. Like
Yeah.
at least at first glance.
Yeah,
Um,
what I'll say, two things I'll say to that is I'm not trying to sell anybody on it because it is just it's it fills a niche that was occupied by basically one company. Because I've said this before, it's like you have Overwatch and what else do you really have in that space? People like to say Team Fortress 2. I don't think they've ever been competitors, and I said why a couple weeks ago. But it's like finally, Overwatch has just basically been in this space. Nobody's really stepped up to compete, and those that have never really took off. And now you have Rivals, which arguably eclipsed Overwatch immediately, and it's more focused on
Pretty
fun
funny
and
how quickly Rivals took like 8
yeah.
Overwatch's lunch.
Well, because here's the thing. Overwatch got to the point that it was at because, Blizzard as a company was bleeding talent. The C teams basically working on Overwatch now. They're confused. They fall into that trap of they fall into that trap. We talk about it with multiple games, but they fell into that trap of, okay, what does the competitive scene need? What does the competitive players need? Who's yelling the loudest on Twitter with the biggest following? What do they think? And they got pushed around. It's a shame. And once you start leaning into that, it's a death spiral. It's just a matter of when. And at a certain point, it's too hard to course correct. So now, if Overwatch wanted to balance around like fun and just enjoyment, what would end up happening is like they would lose the competitive players that basically keep them alive, even though the competitive scene is basically dead and there's no money in it anymore. So basically, it's to digress, it's just a fun competitor. It's free to play. It's got all the things that Overwatch has kind of bucked over the years. There's no stupid, messaging crap. There's no ugly characters, or there are, but I should say, it's almost like how we talk about Space Marine, and we're just like, it's a game that feels like it came out in a generation or two
Speaking
ago.
of Space Marine, I'm actively installing it. Actually, you'll get a kick out of this. I uninstalled Destiny 2 to make space for Space Marine 2.
Amazing, good for you, good for you. But yeah,
I have more to say on this, but continue.
That's fun. Yeah, but what I was getting at is Rivals feels like that. It's almost like I could have seen this coming out like a year after Overwatch as like the blatant copy. With all the things of the time, and it's just, it's not perfect. It's got its issues. We talked about like the weight of animations last week, and obviously it's free to play, so they're very stingy with, what you can get. And the balancing isn't perfect, even though it's catering towards fun, which is good, but it fills the niche better than most people, and all it really needed to do was at that level or slightly better to compete with the one person in that space doing it. So
yeah,
those are the games I've been playing, and that's kind of my opinion on Rivals.
That's the problem with lack of competition, is that one company or brand will just get so complacent because they did it so well when they launched, and then nothing else came out to compete with it, and now like you have Marvel Rivals that is directly competing with Overwatch, and I'm not educated enough in like that genre to know if there's actually any kind of innovation, but you slap the Marvel name with the heroes on anything, and like you immediately have a built-in audience. It's not like you're launching a new IP, so like they kind of had an advantage.
They did, but also like I agree with you that Marvel is a big draw for people, but then again, look at Avengers. It didn't help Avengers any. Avengers still died.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, game design is still bad game design.
So it's a great opener. I'll put it that way. Like Marvel, some people still look. Obviously Marvel's and comic brands in general, they're kind of like in a slump based on how they've been handling all of their properties from the raw comics to the movies. But Marvel, these are characters that have been around upwards of 70 years, right? So you get people's attention, and they look, and the first thing they see is a unique, appealing looking art style, characters that aren't deliberately ugly, a hero shooter that is balanced around fun. There's no barrier to entry. You can just walk right in. It's free to play, and that's how you end up with the Marvel Rivals. And to be completely clear, like I said, I'm not talking it up like it wasn't like, Dan, we have to go and re-record the end of the year show. I love Marvel Rivals that fucking much. It's like in normal times, this would be like, it's just like we would treat it almost like we did the first Descendant. Like we picked it up, we played it, maybe we go back to it, but it's just there's nothing else in that space aside from Overwatch, and Overwatch has sucked for a long time for multiple reasons. So
yeah. I have way more time in the first Descendant than I'm comfortable having in that game.
I don't dislike the first Descendant. I just think that
Exxon.
Well, aside from that, I think that it needs like a bit more going on with the gameplay, where they need to unshackle the abilities a little bit, and I didn't like their pacing. Like I've mentioned it plenty of times. I'm going to mention it until the day I fucking die. Pacing is a huge thing for me, both in, traditionally pacing, we talk about story, but I'm also talking about gameplay pacing. Like I feel like like going from mission to mission was a bit awkward because it's just like, you gotta run here, then listen to them talk, and it's a long time talking, and then the mission objective isn't as clear as it could be, and then you go back to the mission, you gotta talk to five. There was too much downtime in the wrong ways in the first Descendant for me. But it's not bad. It's just it's rough around the edges. It's a solid 7, and it's appealing to look at to boot.
Solid 7.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, cool. With that out of the way, I guess you mentioned that you had a good opener, so I needed to hear this.
So and I'm gonna ask your opinion on it because I'm honestly, this is a gray area for me because I'm honestly, we've definitely talked about this in the past, and I don't know where you're at with it. So I guess this will be a learning experience for both of us. I wasn't really gonna bring it up any earlier than it needed to be because it's not a series I ever got into, and we just found out about the new game at the Game Awards, and we didn't even really discuss it when we talked about the Game Awards. I tuned out when it was on the screen, when it was being shown, and I don't even remember you mentioning it at any point. And that, Dan, is The Witcher 4. I have what's, I guess, between critique...
Oh yeah, we didn't even touch on that.
Yeah, we didn't really touch on that.
It's not like okay, so I have been interested in The Witcher for a long time.
Okay.
I tried the first one like years ago, and it was not, to my recollection, it was not a very well-made game. Like I just couldn't play it, so I put it down.
Before you continue,
hold on.
Yeah.
Okay. No, go ahead. Good.
No, I was just gonna say, I want to rush to the defense of The Witcher 1 because it has like non-traditional gameplay, but the first time I tried to play it, it crashed. So I guess I'm kind of forced to agree with you on this one. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So The Witcher 1, I just couldn't play it. I just didn't think it was that fun. The writing, I don't know if the quality of writing in The Witcher 1 was like up to par with how it was in 2 and 3. I played a little bit of The Witcher 2, but like I still, it was like, this is gonna sound kind of shitty, but it was way too like RPG heavy for me, and I guess that's like exactly the type of game that, that's the demographic that game is going for, which is fine. So that was The Witcher 2. I have it in my Steam library. I've just never completed it.
Okay.
The Witcher 3 I just never played because the 1 and 2 were lackluster experiences for me. So like I just kind of never bothered with 3, even though I've had several people tell me on multiple different occasions that The Witcher 3 is like the best RPG ever made, and that or one of the best RPGs ever made, and you really should go back and play it. It's a great game, blah blah blah. I just never played it.
Yeah.
And I do like the show to an extent. I don't think it's like amazing or anything, but I kind of respect the fact that it's like a halfway decent adaptation of a video game property, and the character Geralt was played by Henry Cavill, who's like a pretty decent nerd in like his own right as far as celebrities go. So
yeah.
that's not like a selling point. It's just
I will
it's
say
something I take of note.
That's actually a good point because a lot of my feelings about The Witcher in general, I kind of have to go by like I'm in orbit around it, but I also have very limited experience with it. So I just, how there's kind of like red flags and green lights, and you're just like, oh, that's good, oh, that's bad. One of the things I'll say just before I get into what I was talking about, just because you led into the Witcher TV show, my opinion on the Witcher TV show, because I have minimal experience with it. I saw some things about it and I tuned out immediately. I have that same opinion of yours right now, where with Henry Cavill, I say like, oh, he's a big nerd, so him being okay with or against something that happens in the background for now, I mean, this could change in the future. It's kind of like one of those things you look for. The fact that he eventually left the show because of creative differences leads me to believe that some of the later portions of the show were probably not the best, And
Which I have to give him credit, because if he likes the source material enough to leave the show over creative differences, then like obviously there's a line in the sand for him personally where
yes,
if they're gonna depart from what made that property great. Even though I'm not a fan of the games, so to speak, like I can still respect that from the perspective of a gamer, where
Mhm.
like if you're gonna just spit in the face of the source material, then you can get fucked. You know,
Yes.
because if they did that with
Yes.
Mass Effect, I would fucking check out
And there's a lot of
immediately.
that going around in the industry
Yeah,
and has been for a while.
yeah.
But aside from, like, I don't want to go too much on the TV show, just because there are some things I remember seeing and hearing, just as like when it was brand new and you know people talk. I'm just like, okay, well this ended like I'm pretty sure there's like a faction that's like superimposing in the books and the video games, and whoever was in charge of design made their armor in the show look like wilted scrotums as like some kind of male fragility thing that was going on.
I
And I'm
think
just
I know who
like,
you're talking about. I just don't remember the
yeah.
name of the
Yeah, I
faction.
remember seeing comparison shots of these
It's
guys
all
in
like
black
black
armor.
armor. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly. And like in the game it's like this finely crafted armor and imposing, and then like the one picture, I mean obviously there's multiple knights in the show, but this one picture that got around was like this kind of out of shape guy in like really tight armor that's also, it looks like raisins. And I'm just
yeah.
like,
Yeah, that's a
see, that
great
seems that
raisins.
seems that seems a bit odd, and then you find out that was an intentional design choice by the people behind it, as like some kind of shot about, like I said, male fragility or something like that. Anyway, don't want to talk about the TV show. That's a whole other topic. But
Yeah.
what you pointed to is important, because I have, I guess what's between critique and concern. I guess it's criticism, but it's not quite that. I don't know.
That's exactly the word I was gonna. Well, yeah, no,
Okay,
because
okay. It's criticism. That makes
concern is
sense.
like when things get really bad,
And critique
and
is like when we sit in front
critique
of
is
it, I guess. I don't.
critique is more like this is what I would change.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so criticism and like red
Yeah.
flags. There's a few things, Dan, that have made me go, "Uh oh," you know. So
Okay.
first things first is, for years before the, like in between Cyberpunk 2077 and now they've been mass hiring these activist types, the ones that just ruin fucking everything. We also learned quite a bit about CD Projekt Red's hiring practices and how they're not really merit based. They're definitely about, you know, all like the global, you know, policies and all the modern DEI bullshit. They're one of the first companies to publicly announce like their ESG video with how they kind of base their hiring and their development processes around, you know, these global metrics of what's seen as good and proper, right?
Mm.
Aside from that, there's been a slew of interviews since The Witcher 4 was announced where the first thing they say is like CD Projekt Red, the company, whoever was speaking for them, says that they have not consulted the original author or the book. And I my first thing is like, okay, you make an adaptation about that. That's already a red flag, but they have a series behind them. But from a lore standpoint, that kind of is just like, that's kind of a red flag for me, where I'm like, I'm worried about like underlying things that should make sense. And if you're not taking it seriously, why should I?
That goes up into a point for me. Like, if they're gonna change stuff from the games or the books to the show, if it works from like a story perspective and it's not if it's not like some shade of woke bullshit, then fine, like I'll watch, I'll get on board with it if
The
it's competent. But if they're just changing it for the sake of change, because you know how when they were making the Halo TV show,
mhm,
the showrunners were like, yeah, we intentionally didn't play the games and we don't want to make it
yes,
like a copy of that, like, and anybody who's a Halo fan worth their salt was like, okay, well, you can go fuck yourself then.
yeah,
Like that was a prime example of changing something for the sake of change, even though you
yes,
basically had a phenomenal fucking story right in front
mhm,
of you,
yeah,
with everything that you could have needed to make an award-winning TV show, but you just actively chose to ignore it. Um,
yes.
like that's kind of where I would draw the line.
That, yeah, no, I get that too. I'm obviously a bit more strict with that, but what I was getting at is to kind of give them a little bit of leniency. They do have a very well regarded trilogy to build upon. You know, they don't necessarily need
Right.
to go one to one, because the book lore is only, to my understanding, is only as deep as like one story and a bunch of underlying like just lore and how things work in the
Right.
history. So that I was like just more like it's a little brazen for them to say that, but it's still kind of like I'm wary about that. Aside from that one interview, there's been multiple other interviews out of the gate where they talk about retroactively framing certain things from the series. Like one of them just like, oh well, the Witcher title in The Witcher is always referred to Geralt and Ciri, and I'm just like, well, that's definitely not true to my understanding of things, but like that's just such a weird thing to say in the first place. It seems like you're trying to get in front of something, not that you're actually trying to proclaim something.
I don't even know enough about the book lore to comment on that. Like as far as I knew, that Geralt and Ciri were always the two main protagonists.
Yeah, like see, yeah, no, they always were, but like that's why the whole to kind of like to go off to a tangent for a little bit is like we've seen like a kind of uptick in cultural actors trying to like pivot and make it a big deal that there are women protagonists when that's not really what's being talked about. Like my understanding is a lot of people like Ciri. She was always kind of one of her options, because there's multiple endings, was always to kind of like take up this mantle to some degree, where she was kind of being groomed to be a protagonist almost by the writers, right? Like that was an option. They could take the story down if they really wanted to. But like people are immediately like, you have the people that are interested in the lore who are just making it out to be like, oh, you could just play a Ciri, you don't need to make her a Witcher, it doesn't make sense for her to be a Witcher. And you have the people on the other side who are like, just like, oh, look at those bigots, they just don't like women protagonists, kind of like what happened with the Ghost of Yute when that got announced. So it's already a clusterfuck from that angle. What else happened? And to go back on the what I was.
What were we even talking about?
We were. Like, I was going down the list of things that are just making me concerned about the game.
Oh, right.
And other than that, they have a guy at the top who is, his title at the company is franchise and lore director, right? Sounds like a pretty big deal, And this is for the company and The Witcher. And you look at his history, he's a former journalist, and not just the hack kind, but like argue online, fighting with gamers, pronouns in bio, like the kind of guy that like would call people like you and me entitled pieces of shit for not wanting stuff being changed. He said he wants to physically assault people because we're apparently all too entitled and too mean to others online. But to kind of digress, all of that is just like a fraction of what we're going to see as The Witcher 4 gets closer to release, because people are going to... I have a feeling that's going to be another big battleground game. I don't necessarily think... Like, I don't have an opinion on the game proper so far, because, as
all we've seen is like pre-rendered cutscene,
exactly,
or cinematic,
exactly,
or whatever.
Like we prefaced all of this with like, we're not too big into The Witcher, because you have your history with it, I have my history, that it never really clicked for us, right? And you may be thinking to yourself like, oh well, why are we even talking about this? Why are we just here to like get some outrage going on or something like that, right? But
there are some games that are just big enough to even if they're not in your purview, still pay attention to them.
Exactly. And funnily enough, on top of that, we're entitled to this critique. Not even in the traditional way you just said, where, it's big enough and, things like having standards is a good thing. But one of the very first interviews, Dan, it was them talking about gaining potential new players, and wouldn't you know it, that's me and you, buddy. We're potential new players, so I guess we're entitled to talking about this. And basically, I also found it odd that we actually didn't comment at all when the Game Awards were a thing. I guess it just, like I said, it just went over both of our heads. But the bottom line is like that. I think that game's in trouble. I would hesitate just from how they handled Cyberpunk alone. I do think The Witcher is probably going to be a much smaller project, but like I don't know. Yeah, the only way that game comes out unscathed is if they like I don't know, if it was in development for as long as Cyberpunk was, up until it was quote unquote completed. They're still doing updates, but I just don't think like
Cyberpunk was technically in development for like close to 10 years.
Yeah, like you gotta understand. I understand that The Witcher is probably a smaller project than Cyberpunk was, right? But it's like,
I don't know. I think they might be on par with each other. Like The Witcher is a big enough IP for CD Projekt Red where I think they would pour enough time and resources into it.
But this kind of factors into like the last time we talked about it, whether it was on this podcast or not, is one of the very first things they did after like they had concluded, not concluded because the game received updates after this, but after they said to themselves and to anyone who was interested, they said like Cyberpunk 2077 is in a not manageable. What the fuck did they say? They didn't say complete either. They said in a good state, essentially. They said like this is a state they were happy with. I forget exact word they used, but they basically said it's done. Anything on top of this is just, you know, extra. Like the game is functional now, basically. You know, it is where it needed to be at launch. And immediately after that statement, or like within the realm of a month, they announced 3 to 4 major projects. They announced a sequel to Cyberpunk. Right,
that's just too much.
They announced that The Witcher 4 was in development, or they just called it like Codename Polaris or something. And I believe they also announced a remake of the first Witcher. And I'm just like, you guys,
that's true.
You guys limped out of the gate and needed to like spend like the next year or two. I would argue they're still fixing the fucking game, and you announce like 4 major projects immediately afterwards. I'm like, I don't have faith in that. Like, you guys botched this, and your thing wasn't like, let's recuperate. Well, they're basically, to me, they're coasting off of the goodwill of the fact that like people just have goldfish memory.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like, people's memories are not that long. Where Cyberpunk is in a spot right now where it's a look. You and I have differing opinions in Cyberpunk, and that's fine. But I personally love that game, and like I don't have a goldfish memory. Like I remember
you
how
remember
the game. Yeah, I remember how the game launched. Like I purposely did not pick it up for a year, and then when I did buy it, it was half off, and the game was playable. Maybe it was a little bit better than playable, but like I purposely held off for a very long fucking time because I didn't want to play through a game that was gonna be buggy and was basically like an incomplete product. But it where was I going? Like you and I have differing opinions with that game, and people have goldfish memories, but I think that now Cyberpunk is in a spot where like people adore that game, and that's, for all intents and purposes, that's all the game ever was, is that a game that people adored. And it doesn't matter the state in which it launched, it just matters the state in which it exists.
It's possible, but it's also like that's also for as long as it's the company's focus, because like people will slip through the cracks and realize how much of a mess the game was. And I think that everybody involved, whether you're somebody who liked the IP they were working with, or you wanted the game to be good from the get-go, should never let anyone forget what they went through. And I think that people will get a harsh reminder of exactly what that is when The Witcher 4 comes out, because based on their hiring practices, based on their internal focuses, based on all the interviews that we just got, which is, to me, it's all most of what I've seen so far is just preemptive damage control.
Well, I think you're right and you're wrong in a handful of ways. You finish your thought, but I'll go into that in a second.
Yeah, and it just everything I just mentioned, and the fact that like I don't think they learned anything from Cyberpunk. I think they coasted on the fact that it's like, oh, we'll fix it, and then they had that one mid-anime come out, and everybody loves the anime, so that they love the IP again. And I think they're going to coast on the fact that after like 4 years post-launch, I forget how long it's been out, but like they're just saying, oh, look how good the game is now, look at the cool anime we got. And I just think that everybody is set to have the rug pulled out from under them when The Witcher 4 comes out, because I'm not saying it's going to be as disastrous as Cyberpunk 2077, but I don't think it's going to be nearly as stable as it should be based on the learning experience that was Cyberpunk 2077. That's my takeaway.
That's all fair and valid points. But I think that the people that are into the industry as much as you and I are, and that have been through launches such as Cyberpunk before, I think that the red flags will be more apparent with like once we get gameplay footage. I think red flags will be more apparent now than they were back when Cyberpunk was being marketed.
That is true.
Prior to its launch, because oh god, what the hell was I going to say?
people
Yeah,
being able to see
looking
more
yeah,
pre-launch.
looking back on it, I feel like we would have known more, and CD Projekt Red had such a bank of good faith built up with their audience that it
Yes.
didn't even matter like what people saw
Yeah.
before that game came out.
Hmm.
But now that we went through the whole debacle of the Cyberpunk launch, regardless of how the game exists now, the people that are interested enough in it to follow the media coverage and be interested to buy the game when it comes out, and that are also like plugged into the industry and pay attention and see the track record, so to speak. I feel like most people in those two narrow categories would be able to make an informed decision on like whether or not it's gonna shit the bed at launch.
Yeah. No, no, you
So
got a good point
that's
because
my
I think
thought.
you know that is something that I'm just thinking from I guess an outdated perspective, but and the fact that it is really so early, but you do have a good point in that it's less likely. Like I think basically the takeaway is that I think a lot of the issues that I pointed out are going to be there, but to what you're saying is that it probably won't surprise as many people. They'll just be more aware
Yeah.
of it pre-release.
But again, like that Venn diagram of people that pay enough of attention to how like the game industry works,
Mm,
and also like are interested in that particular game, whether or not to buy it. Like I think
mm,
it's a very small fraction of the overall population that would actually go out and spend money on it. Like if your average schmuck just saw the like a gameplay trailer of The Witcher 4 and it had X, Y, and Z red flags that were apparent in Cyberpunk's marketing campaign, then I don't think it would matter. Like I think that person would still go out and buy The Witcher, even if it was going to have a shitty launch.
So I actually, given the new angle that you kind of reminded me of, I actually disagree. I think they're going to need to play it a lot safer
Okay.
because like I would say, we could argue whether the reasons are wrong or right, but I think we are kind of in an era of more consumers being enlightened, you know? Um,
Yes, but
I think
given
I, to kind of tell you where, just to kind of give you my full view on that before you necessarily have your opinion on it, is that what I mean by that is like we have more people paying attention to things that annoy them. I'm hoping that in the future, as things continue to change in the industry, people are able to keep that alertness but focus more on like quality and not just like modern day issues, which are bad and they should be focusing on, but like they will eventually be gone. I just think I think that the release frame for The Witcher means it's going to get caught in some unsavory crossfire regardless of what the content is, because people are on a hair trigger with a lot of this stuff. Like I mentioned before, like people are making an unnecessary fight about Ciri as the protagonist, and not just the people that would get annoyed by that, but like the people who want people to get annoyed by that so that they see it as some kind of own or something. And I
uh,
think that dragging it into that fray is going to, even though people should be more upset about how it potentially performs and, some of the underhandedness that's going into it, but will get caught in, this cultural crossfire where they end up not getting it to begin with, or at the very least, the topic of the game makes them so frustrated that they'll just back away from it. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, any way you slice it, like I'm going to be very interested to see what they have to show for The
Yeah.
Witcher 4 and if it's going to throw up the same red flags that CD Projekt Red did. I think that you're right in with them having to play it safe because one, they announced Cyberpunk way too early, and two, they made way too many promises.
Yeah.
So like those two on their own are big enough are big enough precursors to know whether or not this game is going to be like good or bad at launch. So we'll see
Yes.
what happens.
Yes.
Anyway,
It's
continue.
actually it's actually so to kind of move off of The Witcher and just kind of go to a small other point. Just because that's pretty much all I had to say. Because like just to we aren't as invested in The Witcher. I just found it funny that this big game. It's just I think it's set up for a shit show.
Yeah.
But to kind of segue from that, because you were talking, you and me kind of got into consumers and what they're, whether or not they're paying attention and will they avoid things. In a similar story going on, Dragon Age: The Veilguard. Have you been keeping up with that?
No.
Okay, so it's not some huge massive event, but obviously we talked about it a bit, and we were kind of we're more in the game just to say like, hey, we're kind of worried about Mass Effect because like it's the same company and it's the same people, and so what we talked about, and when I talked about it with you, I basically said we're going to need to wait for the dust to settle to see what's really going on. Everyone's going to have their own. The dust has kind of settled, and we've gone from in the different stages, because you had all the developers and all the fans going, it's going to be awesome, to the game came out and it sold phenomenally well, it's awesome, oh it's great, you guys are just talking crap, to people like you and me, Dan, we're the reason the game didn't do so hot, and we're just basically like the worst kind of people. So it's basically, we now know that it did not sell the amount it needed to, because you have the director doing, you have the journalist on the inside that want to champion these causes interviewing the one of the lead guys, I forget his name. And he's basically, they do like the whole thing is like, oh, it's a game, I just wanted to push it and make the kind of stories that I want to see and what everybody wants to see, and we're just doing this, this amazing, wonderful thing of just telling stories, and it's all the people out there, the outrage mob that makes us suffer and makes the players suffer because the games don't sell well. So I guess we now know that all the shit that we talked about, all the red flags and all that terrible, dreadful stuff, enough people paid attention to it where it did not sell nearly as well as it needed to, because they're in that stage of grief right now where they're doing the routine where they go to different interviews who are sympathetic to the causes that they wanted to champion by shoving it into the game, and as people are making fun of it, they're going to be, the developers and the people at the top are going to be spinning sob stories about how if it weren't for the evil gamer man, everything would be perfect and this game would have sold millions upon millions of copies out of the gate. I still think that we're in for like an announcement at some point in the next 6 months where they say like, the Dragon Age: The Veilguard, over 1 million copies sold, and they're going to play it off to be like an amazing thing, even though it definitely 100% undersold by reasonable metrics and by EA's metrics. So we'll see where that lands BioWare in Mass Effect time.
Speaking of BioWare and Mass Effect,
Yes.
I'm gonna hijack that story and use that as a perfect segue
You can go for
to something that I want to talk about.
Go for it.
I think I sent you the trailer, but have you heard of the game Exodus?
I watched the trailer, yeah.
Okay, so it's made by ex-BioWare devs, and it's actually being written by Drew Capershin, Capershin, something like that.
Something like you
who
pronounced
wrote
it well enough.
Yeah, who wrote the original Mass Effect trilogy, and
I think wasn't he mostly involved with 1 and 2?
You're probably right, but I'm pretty sure he had a pretty big hand in 3. Maybe Mac Walters wrote the 3rd one.
It's hard to remember, because I remember there was like 3 to 4 writers involved with the trilogy, and one of them wasn't shafted, but a lot of the ideas and seeds he put into 1 and 2 didn't get followed through on 3.
Yeah,
I digress. You go ahead.
Yeah, I don't really know about that. Anyway, they released a gameplay trailer I think 4 days ago. It looks pretty good, actually. Also, Matthew McConaughey is doing a lot of voiceovers for the marketing of this game. Yeah, I thought that was pretty neat. I watched a video not too long before we started recording, actually, of like the introduction of the enemy race, and I'm like, this voice sounds really familiar. And I kept listening. I'm like, this is fucking Matthew McConaughey. Like, this is perfect. But anyway, so yeah, they dropped a gameplay trailer for Exodus, who you play as the Traveler, and it does look very Mass Effect-y, which I'm fine with. But it also looks like a different take on like what Mass Effect is, so that's cool too. The thing I'm most excited for is playing alongside a cast of memorable characters again. I don't know the last time I played a
Yes.
game where I was like, man, I really like this character in this game.
Yeah, it happens to me more often than you'd think. Not nearly as much as I'd like, but that's one of the strongest things that you feel when you go back to Mass Effect is you just love most, if not all, the characters.
Mhm.
And I would say like the trailer that you sent me. I'm not judging it obviously, but like that's the one thing I didn't pick up on. It was mainly like it was trying to give you like what it was about from a feel standpoint.
Yeah,
Like I
no,
didn't. Yeah.
totally agree. I was just saying, like, just because of the fact that Drew Capertion is attached to it and who's writing the game, like,
Mhm.
that is my immediate takeaway from who the writer is. Like,
Okay.
I'm really looking forward to the cast of characters that are probably going to be in this game, just based
Mhm.
off of the track record of his history with Mass Effect. So, I mean, it's probably going to be a smaller game because they're technically an indie dev now.
Mhm.
But it's, I don't know, like I'm, I just found out about this game like recently, and
Mhm.
I don't know if you could tell from the tone of my voice, but like I'm pretty excited over the fact that, uh, uh, you know, one, it's ex-Bioware devs, and two, it's the guy who wrote the bulk of the trilogy.
Mhm.
So I'm
No, yeah, it's
cautiously
good.
optimistic.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. No, that's a good thing to have.
Yeah.
We'll see how that pans out. Obviously, it's still very early for that, and unlike CD Projekt Red, there's no slew of bad information out there just yet. So we'll see where
Mm.
that goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, what else?
Uh,
I don't know. What do you got? Good.
did you? This is like a small thing, and it's very niche, but it's almost like a somber moment, I guess.
Okay.
Out of the blue, Team Fortress 2 released the final issue of its comic series. It was a small comic
Oh,
series.
really? I had
Yeah.
no idea they even had a
Yes.
comic.
So there was a small comic series. It was very entertaining to me. It had 6 issues and it ended on a cliffhanger.
Oh, that's the worst.
It no. It ended on a cliffhanger, like, oh my god, years ago, like a long fucking time ago. Like the game was still healthily receiving updates long time ago.
Oh,
And aside from that one comic series, there was a lot of small ones. But out of the blue, they released the final issue, and they closed off a
okay.
couple things. And a lot of people look at it as the kind of end of an era moment because it what little story they spun out of the background of Team Fortress and like, you know, why are these two teams fighting, you know, and they made characters of those characters, you know, through all the supplement. You know, remember all the Meet the Heavy and
Oh, I love those
yes,
videos.
those characters were active in comics. You know, they had that one short. They unfortunately, I remember they pitched a show to Adult Swim when all the actors were alive, and unfortunately they didn't pick it up. That would have been awesome.
That's a
But
shame. Oh
that
man,
is
I
a
had no
shame.
idea.
Yeah, I mean, Adult Swim is not quite the arbiter of creative freedom and humor that they make themselves out to be. So I guess it doesn't really surprise me that they turned him down. But that would have been awesome. But anyway, I digress. So this comes out, and it wrapped up all these stories, and there was a lot of like meta stuff in
Hmm.
there that people are picking up on, where it's just like, you know, basically the idea that everybody's taking away is like Team Fortress had its run, it's basically over now, you know. And because there's a lot of like underlying tones of like letting go and wrapping things up, and it's just, it even has like, it's, you know how like video games they have credits and like, and thank you the player for playing, right? There's a
Yeah.
little funny moment on that where they touch on that the way that a comic can, and it was rather nice. And it's just like, that's basically it. I mean, people are still going to play the game. People love the game. I love the game. I just never get a chance to play it all that often, right? And I'm just like, you know, that's
One of my
like,
most played games on Steam. I used
yeah,
to play
it's
Team
like,
Fortress 2 all the time.
yeah, I played it on Steam when it went free to play, and when I borrowed it from you at a certain point. Before that, I had it on the orange box on the Xbox. I played a lot of that too, and it's just like you don't really see games made like that anymore.
Yeah.
And for multiple reasons. Like when I was making the comparisons to Overwatch and Rivals, and I said Team Fortress kind of stands aside from that, is because I consider it's a class-based shooter, not this hero shooter nonsense that everybody likes to do. It was just a finely tuned class-based shooter. It's also one of those games where I mentioned the other week where it's just like there are commentary tracks and you can listen to all this craftsmanship that went into this game, and it really leaves me wondering like when people try to follow that up, be it in Valve with the Team Fortress 3 or outside of Valve with like a new class-based, like how do you match that? How do you follow that up as like a successor, so to speak? And I'm just like, this industry is not capable of making a successor to a Team Fortress 2. And that's that in a way that was somber to me, because it's not just like, oh, you know, it's the end of the line of new discernible content from this old game. And who knows? I'm sure they've got like maybe an update or two left in it, even though there's a skeleton crew working on it. I'm not saying it's over for the game.
It might be a skeleton crew, but like that game still has a very active population.
It does. It's just it's active in population. It's not active in updates, I guess. And it's just like, you know, there are still people holding out for like, you know, there was updates themed around every character, and there's like, I think the Heavy never got his update, so who knows if maybe they got something coming. But the comic was seen very much as okay, Team Fortress 2 is in the state that it is, you know, bearing fixes. This is it now. And I just, you know, it's interesting and kind of somber to kind of like have that closure. And that's really, that's all there is to it. There's no major news. It's just that came to a close, and short of them like rebranding or rebooting something, like that's really it for Team Fortress 2 as a huge thing. They made some teases in there. You never know what could happen, but that's it. So
yeah,
that was just something that popped up out of the blue after years of silence, you know?
You said that you had something to end with, but before we do that, I never went over the whole Bungie lawsuit thing.
Yes, go for it.
So,
because all I heard is that like on top of all their compounding issues, there's apparently a grounds for a massive lawsuit. I don't know. That's
so the former game director of Destiny 2, his name is Christopher Barrett. He was the guy that was responsible for the Rise of Iron expansion and Forsaken, which are the Rise of Iron is remembered pretty fondly. Forsaken is like one of those expansions where like, oh, this saved the game. And he also got moved to the Marathon project where he was leading the development team for that. But Bungie fired him because of apparent like sexual misconduct over like text messages and whatnot.
Sure.
So according to him, like that was all baseless, and they fired him prematurely because they fired him to screw him out of like a $40 million bonus deal that they wouldn't have to pay. In the same vein that, like, remember when Vince Zampella and Jason West got let go from Infinity Ward for like basically the same thing?
Yes.
It was pretty much that. Now, I don't know if, obviously I'm not an insider or anything like that. I don't know if there's any claim to Bungie's claim saying that like, oh, he was exchanging inappropriate text messages with subordinates or anything like that. Right now it's like a bunch of he said, she said, but he's suing Bungie for like 100 million or something like that, or 50 million, I think. And it's just like, as if you can't kick a dog while it's down. This game just keeps on getting rife with fucking turmoil. And that was the elevator pitch of what's going on with that lawsuit. He put out a tweet. He seemed like pretty confident of the fact that like he was on the right side of this, and he can't discuss it because it's an ongoing lawsuit, blah blah blah. But that is, in a nutshell, what was going on with the Bungie lawsuit. Like, it has nothing to do with the development of the game, obviously, but they did fire like basically the entire QA team, and I don't think I ever mentioned this, but like the amount of bugs and issues, like technical issues that are going on with Destiny right now is like so much so to the point where main gameplay systems that are like integrally attached to the current season are just not working. And apparently the game has hit its lowest player base ever. like just ever. Not like really low for this season or episode or whatever, but it just Destiny 2 is in a really, really bad spot.
Yeah.
They're getting sued by multiple people. Apparently, there's like a plagiarism claim
Yeah,
that's out.
yeah. It's
It's bad.
I mean, I'll be honest, I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel for
Yeah, I
Bungie
don't know what's gonna happen.
or Destiny, because like, I mean, you have Sony making all the moves they're making, and while they're doing that, they're essentially like dismantling Bungie in a way where they're just like retrofitting it for their own control.
Yeah.
Every day there's a new controversy. Marathon does not look promising, and you can't even have like it's Marathon is such a warped project to me, because aside from the fact that it doesn't look appealing at all, it also doesn't have it's chasing these trends that are already kind of outdated to chase, and at the same time it doesn't like have any remnants of its original series identity in it. So it's just like, it's like you could have used Marathon more as like an option to like have Bungie do Halo without doing Halo, but instead you like turned it into this weird postmodern extraction shooter that's appealing to no one, and anyone who cared about Marathon as the series doesn't care either. So that's your ace in the hole. As like the walls are closing in, I just don't see a light at the end of the tunnel for any of this.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm happy with the 10-year story arc that Destiny 2 gave me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, that's all well and good, but as far as like bringing things to a close, it just seems like the game is going to die with a whimper and not go out with a bang.
Yeah, I'm a little jealous,
Of
just
what?
because like we talk about, since they always show up at like at the Game Awards, they always show up as the ongoing game. I have Final Fantasy 14 on the other end of it, who also is in a similar situation where they wrapped up the 10-year story and they're trying their best, and it's like it's to the point where like it's a point in the company where like all these moves are being made where like people are like being promoted into higher positions they aren't really built for, and some of the old guard is retiring, and they're hiring people that they really shouldn't, and it's making the game worse as an overall experience. It's not quite as bad as Destiny. Very few things are, but like there's a lot of things where I'm going, that's not really where I would take the game as far as who you're hiring and where the story is going to go. And based on the comments from like the guy in charge, instead of saying like, hey, we're going to look into this, we're going to correct these, just like, don't be mean to these people. If you've got something to say it to me. I'm just like, that doesn't sound like you're going to address what people are worried about. So we'll see what happens with that. But it is, I'm just hoping that Destiny dies quicker so you can just get this out from you, just save you the pain, because I don't see a way out for Destiny. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep up to date with the news, but I'm not playing the game at the moment, so
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Anywho, what do you want to close with, my friend?
Yeah, so this is just a general thing, because I got a chance over the last 2 weeks to see some of that kicking and screaming I was saying we'd get as things start leaning the other way in the industry and culture.
Mm-hmm.
Although, unfortunately, it's not from the source I had hoped. Instead of more developers picking fights or the modern audience, whining, the noise is coming from people who, up until this point, have been very openly against the same nonsense we've been against and dealing with. And they've been, freedom of expression focus and all that. But basically, all of this was centered around the first Descendant. Which we talked about briefly at the beginning. We've played it before. Over the last week or two, some clips have been making the rounds, and some of the new costumes have been, shown off, and I'm sure you can probably guess, having played the game, they're rather heavy on the fan service, right?
Oh, man, putting it.
For whatever reason, when this hit, it highlighted an unfortunate reality that is always kind of looming beneath the surface. Because say what you will about arbitrary sides and labels, but as long as video games have the unfortunate baggage that is mainstream attention. We will continue to see fights over topics that fall outside of what activists of all walks of life, be it the lunatics that are doing all the shit that we don't like now, or like, you know, ultra conservative types of like the 90s that called video games satanic. Whatever they see as falling outside the norm of prim and proper and what they consider right, we're going to keep seeing these fights. And most recently, before the first Descendant, the noise and the fighting was centered around Stellar Blade and its protagonist Eve. But we've already pushed that into the category of, oh, we always loved these characters and they were always really for us and not you. You know, the same shit that always happens where you have like Nier Automata and 2B, Bayonetta, Tomb Raider, and Lara Croft, where it's always like, oh, this objectifies women, this is terrible, and you have whatever Puritans in power would say, like, this is terrible, and then, like, when the game does well and all the smear tactics don't work, they start to claim it. So they've moved on from Stellar Blade because that's empowering now and everybody loves it because, you know, they can't, the sales have spoken and they can't shit on it. It's not popular to do that anymore. So now the ongoing fight, all eyes are on the first Descendant because it has a niche. The people in that niche are mostly happy, and the character designs are made with those people and normal warm-blooded people in mind. So naturally, we can't just have that and let it be. But I guess where I was going with all this is this fighting comes with a twist because all the kvetching is coming from the supposed moderate voices and people who claim they are against censorship and people who claim to champion freedom of expression and meritocracy and all this shit. I have seen more effort from these people going into redefining what pornography is in order to frame games like the first Descendant in a negative light than I have seen them call out any kind of cultural initiatives that got us to this point, the ones that we've been dealing with for years. And I guess what I want to focus on is like what we're going to be dealing with as things change, because I've heard things that I haven't heard in a long time, Dan. People are trying to turn this into a moral thing. Like, think of the children, think of the women. And before we move on from that, I just want to say children shouldn't be playing these games, so we shouldn't be kidifying everything for their enjoyment. And women, if you actually talk to the ones that play games just as much as your average guy or you and me, they secretly love playing as these characters, even more so when they have control over the customization. They just aren't as vocal about it in general public spaces. And guess what? Those that aren't obligated to play these games in the first place. Anyway, what I'm trying to point to is that while we have talked about people on the inside and out, that wear their cultural colors loud and proud as they destroy everything, we also need to pay attention to who is, for the time being, standing next to us, pretending to have everyone's interest in mind, right? I need to get something straight.
Oh boy.
Clear up some things. We are in a period of change. Popular opinions are in the process of shifting. And as this happens, we are going to get voices, new and old, who have claimed to be moderate or more in the middle or just plain against the insanity we've been dealing with. They're going to begin to start preaching about how we are now sliding too far in the other direction. At the first sign of tangible gains against creative meddling and censorship and the modern sensibilities bullshit, these people will give you and me more pushback than they have ever against the forces that brought things to these points. So I need to just say, these people, to anyone who's listening, these people are not on your side. Where the people who have been throttling this industry have been doing it, calling it all problematic. These people standing next to you are ready to do the same exact fucking thing, calling it all degenerate. I've said for a long time, use whatever and whoever to get us to a better place. But when they start doing the same shit in the other direction, cut them loose. When we are finally free, we are not going to backslide from the modern standards Puritanism to the moral policing Puritanism. If you care about freedom in all of these topics and expressions, things that are unpopular to defend, like eroticism or gore or androgyny, you can't let yourself be tricked into following these people into a different cage for that shit. One typically made by them. So basically, as that rant goes, basically all I wanted to say is I think it's ultimately good. It shows that general, like I said, popular opinions are changing, where like people are kind of fed up with modern sensibilities and things are turning the other way. But as we're doing that, the first sign is all these people who like have, moderately sized audiences, or just like who are in the middle, who are moderate voices, are going to be saying like, well, we don't want to overcorrect. I mean, this sure, we fought for like years to have this kind of stuff back in the games, but have you thought of the children? Have you thought of the women? It's literally, we're going from like to I'm going to use you as an example. So in the modern day, Daniel, I remember showing you something from Mass Effect. It was a board game where they gave Asari different pronouns, right? Where instead of it's an all-female race. Doesn't make any
sense, but I digress.
Exactly. It's an all-female race, but now you have people trying to say that it's like, oh, it's the they pronouns or whatever, right? And that's bullshit, and it doesn't jive with the lore, because we, if you went and listened to those audio logs, in the first game, like it says an all-female race, and they go over how the race works, right? So you're going from that, where people are meddling with all the shit you love, going all the way back to when Dan was a wee lad playing Soul Calibur, and his mother saw that and said, absolutely fucking not. That's the example I can give to you, Dan. That's where they want to bring you. You're sick and tired of how it is now. They want to bring you back to when your mother's like, no. That Taki character, she what she's wearing is just nuts. Ivy. Oh, it was Ivy? I always think of Taki. But that Ivy character, you can't be seeing that, Daniel. So I just like, in a way it's good because they are bold enough to make those claims, but everybody needs to be on their toes, because we're going to get rid of this nonsense that has just been plaguing the industry and meddling, and they're going to be dragging their heels in. If the guy next to you starts pushing you in another direction that's just as good, fucking get them out of the way. We've got more important things to worry about than trying to go back into fucking 90s puritanism. That's insane to me. And the fact that I'm seeing it is both frustrating, but also it's a good sign in my opinion, because it means that they are strong enough to make those opinions. So that's my little rant over. Is we have fucking pearl clutchers now in the middle going, oh, the woman is showing just a bit of skin. It's basically pornography. That's insane to me. But yeah.
I don't think that's gonna gain any traction.
I don't think so. It's very unpopular. No. It's at the end of the day, it's just gonna muck things up during this transition to a new potential age. Like, we have enough to worry about. Like, the people we're dealing with, make no mistake, they're fucking insane. Like, at the end of the day, some of them are useful idiots and some of them just are useful activist idiots, but some of these people are fucking insane, and we're gonna have to be dealing with that. We don't need people next to you, but maybe she should just cover up a little bit. Maybe that doesn't really align with the moral values. Think of the kids. Like, no, shut the fuck up. Enough.
Love me a good Anthony rant.
I'm glad you're enjoying it, because it takes a bit from my soul each time I need to rant about this, but it needs to be said.
Yeah, well, it was said. On that note, I think that going with our long-standing tradition of closing out on an Anthony rant. Well, unless you got anything else, I'm done.
I think that's it. I will say though that this is the next time we record, the holidays will have passed. So
yeah, that's true.
To everyone listening, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and all that
happy
good
Hanukkah
stuff. Merry Christmas. The only reason I say holidays is not because of this fucking nonsense, but because I have the one guy who sticks with me. The one guy who sticks with me all this while happens to be a goddamn Jew, so I can't just say Merry Christmas by itself. So yes, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. I'm not gonna no Kwanzaa, but like good everything else. We have one more show before the year ends. I think by the time we record next, the end of year show, where we talk about the game of the year essentially, and a lot of the other stuff that we wanted to talk about just as games, not about the industry, will have come out. That should be coming out the day after Christmas. So
okay, cool.
We've got one more show of the year coming up, and then a bright and wondrous 2025 is right around the corner. So,
Hey,
yeah.
cool.
So
Well,
if you've got any sentiments to get together, get them together before then.
sounds good. I will do that. All right. Well, thank you, anybody who's listening. And you got one more episode before the year is out, and that'll be the first full year of the Pregame Network podcast.
Yeah.
God damn. All right. Well, again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Take care.
Bye-bye.